The shoes are beside the door before sunrise. They have been there all night, pointed outward, as if some quieter part of the body already made a decision the rest of the person has not accepted yet. The room is still. The phone is face down. Somewhere outside, a car passes on a wet street. The person sits on the edge of the bed, not moving, looking at the shoes as if they are not objects, but a question. Today could be the day. The day they leave the job that has been draining them slowly enough to call it stability. The day they stop answering the message that always begins with affection and ends with apology. The day they walk out of the room, city, role, family script, private habit, or old versions of themselves that has become a cage with familiar furniture. Nothing is physically blocking the door. And still, the body does not rise. This is the part that is hardest to explain from the outside. The person knows they are miserable. They're not confused about the pain. They know the sound of it. They know which email will make the stomach tighten. They know which voice will make them shrink. They know which evening will end in silence. They know which promise will come just late enough to keep them from leaving. The suffering is not invisible. It is scheduled, and that is why it has power. A miserable certainty can feel safer than an uncertain freedom, because the nervous system does not only ask whether something is good, it asks whether something is known. It asks whether the danger has a pattern, whether the pain has a map, whether tomorrow will hurt in the same way today did. A cage can become comforting when the person inside it has memorized the walls. Freedom does not offer that. Freedom may offer air, dignity, possibility, relief, and a life that no longer requires shrinking. But at first, freedom also offers emptiness. It offers a morning with no script. It offers decisions without the old excuse. It offers responsibility without the familiar enemy. It offers silence where the old pain used to be. And silence can be terrifying when the mind has learned to orient itself by the sound of harm. So the person stays, not always forever, not always willingly, not always consciously, but often enough for this to be one of the darker facts about human behavior. People do not always remain in suffering because they cannot see the door. Sometimes they remain because the door opens into a life they have not rehearsed. Before we call this weakness, we have to look at something colder. The nervous system can learn to call a prison safe if the prison is predictable. It can learn to call chaos love if chaos arrives with occasional tenderness. It can learn to call exhaustion purpose if exhaustion comes with identity. It can learn to call loneliness protection if closeness once carried danger. Human beings are not only attracted to pleasure, they are attracted to what they know how to survive. This is why change can feel like threat even when staying is destroying you. The mind does not compare suffering with freedom in a clean moral equation. It compares familiar suffering with unfamiliar risk. It does not ask which life is better. It asks, which life can I predict? And if pain is predictable, pain may win. Status quo bias gives this tendency a cold behavioral shape. People often prefer the current condition simply because it is the current condition, not because it is optimal, not because it is meaningful, not because it is kind, but because changing requires the mind to update the world. The old situation may be painful, but it is already installed inside the body. The new one must be learned. This sounds small until you place it inside a life. A person stays in a job they hate because they know how to be tired there. They know which manager to avoid, which meeting will humiliate them, which hour of the day will make them feel dead inside. Another job may be better, but it is full of unknown humiliations, unknown expectations, unknown people, unknown failures. The present misery feels heavy. The possible future feels shapeless. A person stays in a relationship that makes them feel small because they know the pattern, the tension, the accusation, the apology, the soft evening afterward, the return of hope, the next collapse. It is awful, but it has weather. They can smell the storm coming. They can prepare their face, choose their words, silence their needs, survive the night. Freedom, by contrast, has no weather report. A person stays inside an identity that wounds them because it gives them a place to stand. The reliable one, the broken one, the overachiever, the victim, the caretaker, the failure, the one who never asks, the one who always endures. Even painful identities can become homes if they were built early enough. To lose them is not only to lose pain, it is to lose orientation. This is why the old room can feel safer than the open field. The old room may have mold in the walls. It may smell like damp carpet and stale air. It may make the lungs heavy. But the person knows where the light switch is. Outside, there may be clean air, but there is also darkness without furniture. There is no practiced way to move. The body often prefers a known wound to an unknown sky. Kahneman and Tversky's work on loss aversion helps explain part of this. Losses often feel more powerful than equivalent gains. The mind is not a balanced accountant. It does not weigh possible freedom and possible loss with equal calm. It grips the thing that may be lost more tightly than it imagines the thing that may be gained. Leaving a miserable certainty is not experienced only as gaining freedom. It is also experienced as losing a familiar world, losing the job title, even if the job is killing something inside you. Losing the relationship, even if the relationship teaches you to apologize for existing. Losing the city, the routine, the role, the shared history, the private explanation for why life has not become what it could have become. Losing the known version of yourself. People say they want a new life, but a new life usually requires the death of an old witness. Someone inside you has known how to suffer in this particular way. Someone has become skilled at enduring this particular room. Someone has learned which dreams to lower, which needs to hide, which sentence not to say, which parts of the self must be folded small. That someone may be miserable, but they are familiar. Freedom asks that someone to die before another self has fully appeared. That is not easy. The future self is theoretical. The old self is sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing. The new life is an idea. The old pain has texture. It has names, bills, passwords, birthdays, furniture, photographs, routines, muscle memory. The body does not leave abstractions for abstractions. It leaves the known only when something deeper begins to believe the unknown may be survivable. Until then, certainty can disguise itself as wisdom. The person says, maybe now is not the time. Maybe it is not that bad. Maybe every job is like this. Maybe every relationship has darkness. Maybe freedom is childish. Maybe wanting more is selfish. Maybe I am too old, too unstable, too damaged, too responsible, too late. The mind builds arguments around fear and calls them realism. Sometimes caution is real. Leaving can require planning. Safety can require help. Money matters, children matter, housing matters, timing matters. No serious understanding of human pain should pretend that every door can be walked through immediately. But beyond practical limits, there is another force, a quieter force. The fear that if you leave the known suffering, you will no longer know who you are. Learned helplessness carries that fear into the body. In the early work of Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer, animals exposed to uncontrollable negative events later failed to escape, even when escape became possible. The original theory has been revised, but the image remains devastating. A nervous system can learn that action does not matter. And when that lesson goes deep enough, the open door does not look like a door. It looks like another wall. This is what outsiders often miss. They say, why do they not leave? Why do they not apply? Why do they not speak up? Why do they not stop answering? Why do they not choose themselves? The question assumes the person's body still believes action can create difference. But after enough failed attempts, enough punishments, enough disappointments, enough moments where hope led back to the same room, the body may stop expecting escape to mean anything. A person can know intellectually that a way out exists and still feel in the bones that movement is useless. The mind can see the handle. The hand does not reach. Not because the person loves the cage, but because the body has learned the cage is the shape of reality. This can happen in a relationship. The person has tried to explain, tried to leave, tried to set boundaries, tried to become easier to love, tried to become harder to hurt. Each attempt ended in blame, collapse, apology, reversal, or temporary kindness that reset the cycle. Eventually, the body stops preparing for freedom. It prepares for the next version of the same pain. It can happen at work. The person has tried to prove themselves, ask for change, move departments, rest, recover, perform, disappear, become indispensable. Nothing changes except their level of exhaustion. The office becomes not a place, but a weather system. Fluorescent lights, cold coffee, unread messages, the small humiliation of another morning. They begin to believe this is simply what adult life is. It can happen inside the self. A person has tried to heal, change, stop sabotaging, stop returning, stop collapsing, stop choosing the same kind of person. Each attempt fails, or seems to fail. Eventually, they stop thinking, I made a mistake. They begin thinking, this is what I am. Predictable suffering becomes identity. That is one of the darkest transformations. Pain becomes not something that happened, but something that explains you. The person no longer says, I am in a life that hurts. They say, I am someone life hurts. The difference is small in language and enormous in the soul. And if suffering becomes identity, freedom becomes an identity crisis. This is why the first step out often does not feel triumphant. It can feel like panic. A person expects relief and finds nausea. They expect light and find disorientation. They expect the self to expand and instead feel strangely empty. The cage is gone, but so is the map. The pain is no longer telling them what to do. The old enemy is absent, and absence is not the same as peace. When someone has lived too long in predictable suffering, the nervous system can mistake calm for danger. Calm does not provide the usual cues. No one is about to explode. No one is withdrawing affection. No crisis is demanding performance. No familiar shame is organizing the day. The body waits for the old signal and becomes anxious when it does not arrive. This is why some people return, not because freedom failed, but because freedom felt too quiet. The new relationship felt boring because it did not activate the old injury. The healthier job felt meaningless because it did not require self-erasure. The peaceful apartment felt lonely because no one's chaos filled the room. The body confused intensity with meaning. Intermittent reinforcement makes this even harder. If suffering were constant, it would be easier to recognize. If every day were cruel, if every message were cold, if every meeting were humiliating, if every night ended the same way, the pattern would be clearer. But many cages do not work like that. They give relief at unpredictable times. A harsh person becomes tender for one evening. A distant partner sends a message that sounds like the beginning again. A boss praises you just as you were ready to leave. A parent who has been cold suddenly becomes soft. A terrible weekend with one beautiful morning. The reward arrives not often enough to heal the wound, but often enough to keep the nervous system waiting. This is the cruelty of irregular hope. It does not need to be consistent. It only needs to be possible. Skinner's work on reinforcement showed how powerful intermittent reward can be. Behaviors maintained by unpredictable rewards can become persistent because the next reward always feels near. The organism keeps responding, not because every response works, because sometimes it works, and sometimes is enough to keep the hand reaching. In human life, this can look like love. It can feel like destiny. The person thinks, when it is good, it is so good. They remember the soft version, the laughing version, the apologetic version. The morning after the storm, when the hand reaches across the bed and the body feels the relief of not being abandoned. That relief is powerful. It floods the system. It says, see, the pain was not the whole story. Stay. But sometimes what feels like love is the nervous system celebrating the temporary absence of harm. That sentence is difficult. It should not be used carelessly. Relationships are complex. People hurt each other. People change. People repair. Not every cycle of pain is abuse, and not every return is pathology. But there are situations where the relief after cruelty becomes confused with intimacy. The nervous system does not say, I am safe. It says, the danger has stopped for now. And because the stopping feels so intense, it is mistaken for connection. Traumatic bonding lives in this territory. Dutton and Painter described how strong attachments can form in relationships marked by cycles of abuse, power imbalance, fear, and intermittent relief. The person is not simply attached to pain. They are attached to the cycle that turns pain into relief and relief into hope. The bond is strengthened not despite the suffering, but partly through the rhythm of suffering and rescue. This is one reason predictable suffering can be so sticky. The person knows the wound, but also knows the medicine that sometimes comes from the same hand. The one who frightens them also calms them. The place that drains them also gives them identity. The system that humiliates them also gives them moments of recognition. The cage occasionally decorates itself with flowers, so leaving is not experienced as leaving only harm. It is also leaving the hope that the harm will finally turn into what it promised to become. The person does not only grieve what happened, they grieve what almost happened, the version that appeared for one night, the apology that sounded real, the potential everyone else cannot see, the imagined future that has been used for years as a reason to survive the present. There is a special grief in abandoning a future that never existed. Attachment theory deepens this. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth helped show that early relationships shape the internal patterns through which people seek closeness, safety, and regulation. If love was unpredictable early, unpredictability can later feel strangely familiar. Not pleasant, familiar. The nervous system may learn to associate longing, waiting, anxiety, repair, and relief with attachment itself. Then a stable bond can feel suspicious. A calm person can feel dull. A respectful relationship can feel like absence. The body expects the old oscillation, tension, distance, pursuit, relief. Without it, the person may wonder whether anything is happening at all. They may confuse activation with chemistry and peace with emptiness. This does not only apply to romance. A person can be attached to a miserable workplace because it gave them a role. The needed one, the resilient one, the one who survives impossible demands. A person can be attached to family dysfunction because it gave them a function. The mediator, the fixer, the silent one, the responsible one. A person can be attached to loneliness because loneliness at least protects them from rejection. The attachment is not always to a person. Sometimes it is to a structure of self, and structures of self do not fall easily. A person may say they want freedom, but what they want is freedom without the death of the self that adapted to captivity. They want the door open, but they want to carry the whole old identity through it unchanged. They want peace, but also the familiar intensity that told them they mattered. They want a new life, but not the emptiness that comes when the old role stops performing. This is where suffering becomes more than pain. It becomes a script. It tells the person when to speak, when to apologize, when to disappear, when to hope, when to harden, when to forgive, when to expect the blow. A script is limiting, but it reduces uncertainty. Freedom removes the script and asks for improvisation. Many people would rather repeat a tragedy than improvise an unknown life. Erich Fromm understood something close to this in Escape from Freedom. Freedom is not only liberation from external constraint, it is also the burden of separateness, responsibility, and choice. To be free is not merely to have the chains removed. It is to confront the fact that the chains were also organizing you. They told you where to stand. They told you who to blame. They told you what your suffering meant. When the chains fall, meaning does not automatically appear. Sometimes there is only space. Modern people often romanticize freedom because they imagine it as expansion. More options, more autonomy, more self-expression. But freedom also removes alibis. If you are free to leave, then staying becomes a choice. If you are free to speak, then silence becomes a choice. If you are free to begin, then not beginning becomes visible. This is why freedom can feel cruel. It gives dignity, but it also gives responsibility. A miserable certainty can protect you for that responsibility. As long as the cage remains, you can say, I would live differently if not for this. I would become more if not for them. I would try if the world allowed it. Sometimes this is true. Real constraints exist. But sometimes the cage becomes useful because it preserves the fantasy of an unlived self. A self that remains pure because it has never been tested. Freedom threatens that self. It says, now we will see. That may be why some doors remain unopened. Not because the person is afraid there is nothing outside, but because they are afraid there is something outside. and they will not know how to meet it. They are afraid the dream will become ordinary, afraid the new life will still contain loneliness, afraid they will leave the relationship and still feel unlovable, afraid they will leave the job and still feel empty, afraid they will lose the excuse and meet the wound directly. Kierkegaard called anxiety the dizziness of freedom. Anxiety does not come only from danger. It comes from possibility. The fact that one can choose, the fact that the future is open, the fact that the self is not finished. Possibility is not gentle. It is vertigo. It opens the floor. Predictable suffering closes the floor. It narrows life into a corridor. Painful, yes, but narrow. The mind can handle narrow. It can hate it and still handle it. Freedom widens the corridor into a field where every direction implies responsibility. There may be beauty there. There may also be failure, regret, exposure, loneliness, and the discovery that no one is coming to define you. This is why people sometimes defend the very thing that harms them. The defense is not always loyalty. It is fear of vertigo. They defend the job, the partner, the family system, the old habit, the small life, because if they admit it is a cage, then the open door becomes unbearable. Once you see the door, staying becomes harder to explain. So the mind protects itself by repainting the walls. It says, this is normal. It says, this is maturity. It says, everyone is unhappy. It says, at least I know what to expect. It says, people like me do not get better lives. It says, wanton freedom is selfish. It says, peace is unrealistic. It says, I am not trapped. I am practical. Maybe sometimes it is practical, but sometimes practicality is fear that learned adult language. There is no clean line that an outsider can draw from a distance. Lives are too complex. Some people stay because leaving would be dangerous. Some stay because they need money, documents, legal protection, community, preparation, timing, a plan. Some stay because other people depend on them. Some stay because the cost of leaving is real, not imagined. Any honest account must say this: freedom is not always available as a simple gesture, but this video is about the inner cage that can remain even when the outer door begins to open. The moment when a path exists, but the self that would walk it feels unborn. The moment when misery is no longer the only option, but it remains the only option that feels like home. That is where the person sits on the edge of the bed. The shoes are still by the door. The room is beginning to lighten. The body is caught between two futures. One is miserable, but known. The other may be better, but it has no proof. The known future says, I will hurt you in the old way. The unknown future says, I cannot promise what I will do. For a nervous system trained by disappointment, the old pain can sound more honest. Freedom has bad public relations inside a frightened body. It arrives without guarantees. It does not say, you will be happy. It says, you will be responsible for finding out. It does not say, no one will hurt you again. It says, the old wound no longer gets to choose every room. It does not say, you will become someone magnificent. It says, you will have to meet the person who appears when survival is no longer the entire job. That person may not appear immediately. This is another reason people turn back. They leave and expect a clean self to greet them. Instead, they meet confusion, grief, boredom, regret, a strange desire to return to what hurt, because at least there they had a role. Freedom does not instantly produce identity. Sometimes it first produces withdrawal from the old drug of certainty. The first silence after predictable suffering can feel like abandonment. No crisis to solve, no emotional weather to track, no boss to fear tonight, no partner to decode, no old wound to organize the day. The person sits in quiet and does not know whether quiet is peace or emptiness. Their body, trained by storms, keeps scanning the horizon. When nothing appears, it invents thunder. This is why healing can feel worse before it feels better. Not because the old life was better, but because the old life was legible. The new one asks the nervous system to learn a language it has never spoken. Rest, choice, boundary, desire, safety, ordinary joy, mutuality, self-respect. These words can feel foreign to someone fluent in endurance. Endurance is a powerful language. It can keep people alive through terrible conditions. But endurance does not know how to build a life. Once survival is no longer the only task. It knows how to withstand. It does not always know how to want. And freedom demands wanting. That may be the most frightening part. Predictable suffering often kills desire slowly, then rewards the person for not having any. Want less, and the cage feels less small. Need less, and neglect feels less painful. Hope less, and disappointment feels less like betrayal. Over time, the person becomes proud of needing almost nothing. They call it strength. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is starvation with good posture. Then freedom asks, what do you want? Not what can you tolerate? Not what will keep the peace? Not what will make them stay? Not what will avoid punishment? What do you want? The question can feel obscene. Too large? Too late? Too dangerous? Desire after long suppression does not feel like a guide. It feels like a threat. Because desire can be disappointed. Desire can expose you. Desire can make you move. Desire can make you leave the known room. Desire can make you responsible for a life that is no longer explained by injury alone. So people return to tolerance. They say it is not that bad. They say, I can handle it. They say, at least I know this. They say, I have survived worse. And perhaps they have. But survival is not the same as consent. The ability to endure something does not prove it is where you belong. This is one of the great confusions of predictable suffering. Because a person can survive it, they begin to think survival is the answer. Because they can function inside it, they begin to call functioning a life. Because they can predict the pain, they begin to confuse predictability with safety. But a wound you can predict is still a wound. There is a deeper reason predictable suffering can feel morally comfortable. It lets the person keep an old story about the world. If I am suffering, it is because of this job, this partner, this family, this place, this past, this diagnosis, this bad luck. Again, sometimes this is true. But sometimes the old story becomes the last wall between the person and their own agency. If the cage explains everything, the self does not have to answer certain questions. What do I want? What am I afraid to try? Who would I be without resentment? Who would I become if no one were stopping me? Which dream do I keep safe by never testing it? Which identity survives only because I never leave the room that confirms it? These are not gentle questions. They can sound like blame if spoken carelessly, but they are not meant to accuse the person for being trapped. They are meant to reveal why freedom can feel more frightening than captivity. Captivity explains the self. Freedom asks the self to participate in its own becoming, and becoming is unstable. A person inside predictable suffering may secretly know how tomorrow will begin. Even if it hurts, there is comfort in that. Freedom makes tomorrow strange. The coffee tastes different. The phone is quiet. The morning does not immediately tell you who you are supposed to be. There is no familiar villain in the room, no familiar apology to wait for, no familiar dread to organize the body, only space. The mind can experience that space as grief. Not because the cage was good, but because the cage was known. People grieve homes that harmed them. They grieve people who did not love them well. They grieve jobs that drained them. They grieve identities that trapped them. This does not mean leaving was wrong. It means the nervous system can attach to anything that structured its days. There is no freedom without some grief for the old structure. This is why the fantasy of liberation is often misleading. We imagine the person leaving and immediately becoming light. Sometimes there is light. Sometimes there is also shaking. Sometimes the first night after leaving is not joy, but withdrawal. Sometimes the person misses the voice that hurt them, misses the office that exhausted them, misses the drama that made them feel alive, misses the old self because the new self has not yet learned to speak. That does not mean they should go back. It means the body is detoxing from predictability. The old pain had rhythm. The new life has silence. Rhythm can feel safer than silence, even when the rhythm is violence. Silence asks the self to generate meaning from within. That is hard when meaning has long been supplied by crisis. This is where freedom becomes existential. It is not only the ability to choose differently, it is the burden of becoming someone who can live after the choice. A door opening is only the beginning. The deeper question is whether the person can bear the unstructured air on the other side. No one can answer that all at once. Perhaps freedom begins in small refusals before it becomes a dramatic leaving. Not answering immediately, not apologizing for someone else's cruelty, not staying late to prove devotion to a system that never stops taking, not calling anxiety intuition every time peace feels unfamiliar, not treating the first wave of loneliness as evidence that the cage was home. These are not cinematic gestures. They are almost invisible. A phone left unanswered, a boundary set with a shaking voice, a resume opened, a number blocked, a bag packed slowly, a truth admitted to one friend, a morning where the person notices the old pain and says, "Not forever." Something in the body begins to learn that action may still matter. That learning is fragile. It can be lost. The person may return. They may repeat the cycle. They may leave and go back, speak and go silent, hope and collapse. From the outside, this can look irrational. From the inside, it is often the nervous system testing whether freedom will punish them. The way out of predictable suffering is rarely a straight line. It is more like teaching the body a new law of physics. At first, every step feels illegal. Joy feels borrowed. Rest feels undeserved. Respect feels suspicious. Safety feels like the pause before impact. The person may not trust good things because good things have been used before as bait. So, the new life must become predictable too, but in another way. Predictably safe, predictably respectful, predictably honest, predictably quiet without punishment. This takes time. The nervous system does not believe speeches, it believes repetition. Maybe that is the answer to why people choose miserable certainty. Because misery has repeated itself enough to become credible, while freedom has not. Freedom may be true, but it has not yet built a history in the body. The old pain has evidence. The new life has only possibility. And possibility is not always inspiring. Sometimes possibility is a cliff. Kierkegaard's anxiety of possibility returns here. The open future does not only promise rescue, it also reveals that the self is unfinished. You could become many things. You could fail in many ways. You could choose wrongly. You could discover that the cage was not the only source of suffering. You could find that freedom does not erase loneliness, but makes it honest. You could learn that no one was coming to write the rest of your life for you. That is why some people choose the room. In the room, the suffering has a name. Outside, the self must name itself. But there is also a quiet horror in never leaving. Predictable suffering does not stay the same. It deepens. The job that drains you begins to shape your face. The relationship that shrinks you begins to shrink your imagination. The role you perform becomes the limit of what you can picture. The life you tolerate becomes the life you defend. One day, the cage is not something around you. It is the architecture of your wanting. This is how people lose years. Not always through dramatic disaster, sometimes through small, reasonable postponements. Not today. Not until things calm down. Not until I am stronger. Not until they change. Not until I am sure. Not until leaving feels easy. But leaving the known pain may never feel easy. The body is not waiting for ease. It is waiting for proof that cannot arrive before the step. Some forms of certainty are paid for with a life. And still, the video should not end with a command to leave. Human beings are not slogans. Some people listening to this may need a plan, a shelter, money, legal help, medical care, community therapy, time, documentation, safety. Some may not be choosing misery at all. They may be surviving constraints others cannot see. To tell everyone to simply choose freedom would be another cruelty, dressed as courage. But there is an inner question that can be asked quietly, without spectacle. Is this suffering still protecting you, or only preserving itself? Is the certainty you cling to a real shelter, or a familiar fire? Are you staying because the door is truly closed, or because the hallway beyond it has not yet become imaginable? No one else can answer that cleanly. The answer may change. It may come slowly. It may first arrive as anger, then grief, then a small practical step. It may arrive not as confidence, but as exhaustion with the old pain. Sometimes people do not leave because they become fearless. They leave because the known suffering finally becomes less tolerable than the unknown. That moment is not always beautiful. It can be quiet. A morning, a pair of shoes, a bag, a document saved, a message not sent, a key returned, a resume opened, a boundary spoken. Not the whole life changed at once. Just one piece of the old certainty interrupted. The person on the bed looks again at the shoes. The fear has not disappeared. The old room still knows their name. The old pain still offers its predictable schedule. Stay, and tomorrow will hurt in the way yesterday did. Leave, and tomorrow may hurt in a way no one has taught them to survive. This is the crossroads many people never name. Not happiness versus misery. Not strength versus weakness. Not courage versus cowardice. But known pain versus unknown self. The unknown self is the frightening one. It waits outside the old structure without a face yet. It has no practiced voice, no reputation, no routine, no proof. It may be awkward, lonely, angry, grieving, free in a way that does not yet feel good. But it is also the self that suffering could not fully become. The self that may learn to want again. The self that may discover that peace is not emptiness, and respect is not boredom, and silence is not abandonment. No cage teaches that. Only the space after the cage can. The person may not walk out today. That is possible. The body may not be ready. The plan may not be complete. The fear may be too loud. But something has changed if they can finally see the truth without decorating it. The room is a room. The cage is a cage. The pain is not destiny just because it is familiar. The door is not a lie just because it is frightening. Freedom may not arrive like a sunlit field. At first, it may look like a hallway with bad lighting, a bag packed badly, a shaking hand, a night with no familiar footsteps, a morning where no one tells you who to be. It may feel less like victory and more like withdrawal from a drug you once called home. But perhaps that is where a different life begins. Not with certainty, not with comfort, not with the promise that the unknown will be gentle, only with the refusal to keep mistaking familiar pain for safety. The miserable certainty will always have an argument. It will say, "At least you know me. At least I have a map. At least I can tell you who you are." And the uncertain freedom may have no argument at first. Only space, only silence, only the terrifying possibility that you might have to become someone no cage has prepared you to be. Maybe what keeps people in suffering is not love for the cage. Maybe it is the fear that outside the cage, they will have to meet a version of themselves no one ever taught them how to live.